The fluorescent lights of the grocery store cast harsh shadows across Maya's face as she stood frozen at the checkout counter, her EBT card trembling in her weathered hands. The automated voice seemed to echo through the entire store. Transaction declined, insufficient funds. 23 years old, working 2 jobs, and she couldn't even afford a pack of diapers for her 8-month-old daughter sleeping peacefully in the shopping cart beside her. Maya's cheeks burned with shame as she felt the weight of judgmental stares from other customers in line. The cashier, a teenager with purple hair and kind eyes, looked at her with sympathy that somehow made everything worse. "I'm sorry, ma'am. Do you want to try removing some items?" "No, it's okay," Maya whispered, her voice barely audible. She reached for the pack of diapers, her last necessity after putting back the milk, the bread, even the generic formula she'd hoped to stretch another week. Little Emma would have to wear cloth diapers fashioned from old t-shirts again tonight. Maya had become an expert at making do with nothing. Behind her, she could hear the impatient shuffling of feet and barely concealed sighs. A woman in designer workout clothes tapped her manicured nails against her phone case. "Some people should really plan better," she muttered to her companion, just loud enough for Maya to hear. Maya's eyes filled with tears she refused to let fall. She'd planned. God, how she'd planned. Every dollar stretched, every expense calculated down to the penny. But when your rent takes 70% of your income from 2 part-time jobs that won't give you full-time hours, and daycare costs more than you make in a week, planning only goes so far. When your ancient car breaks down and you choose between fixing it or feeding your baby, planning becomes survival. "Ma'am?" The cashier's voice was gentle. "Is there anything else you'd like to try?" Maya shook her head, unable to speak. She began to gather her purse, preparing for the walk of shame past the line of customers, past the security guard who'd been watching her suspiciously since she'd entered with her threadbare coat and scuffed shoes. She'd walk the 12 blocks home in the October cold, carrying Emma, trying to figure out how to make 3 diapers last until her next paycheck in 4 days. That's when she heard a voice from directly behind her, calm and decisive. "Excuse me, miss, I'd like to pay for her groceries." Maya turned around to see a man in his 50s, wearing a simple navy sweater and jeans. Nothing about his appearance screamed wealth and no Rolex, no designer labels, no obvious signs of the power he wielded. But there was something in his eyes, a depth of understanding that suggested he'd seen struggle before, maybe lived it himself. "Oh, no, I couldn't possibly," Maya started. "Please," the man said, stepping forward. "I insist." He looked at the cashier. "Everything she has, plus," he glanced at Maya's cart, noting the sparse contents. "Add a week's worth of groceries, milk, bread, eggs, whatever a young mother needs." The cashier looked confused but began scanning items as the man who'd introduced himself simply as David gathered additional necessities from nearby shelves. Maya stood in shock, watching this stranger fill her cart with more food than she'd bought in months. "Why?" she managed to whisper. David paused, holding a jar of baby food. "Because everyone deserves dignity, because kindness shouldn't be rare, and because," he hesitated, then continued quietly, "because 30 years ago, I was a single father standing in a line just like this one, counting pennies and praying my card wouldn't be declined." The woman behind them had gone silent. Other customers in line had stopped their fidgeting. Even Emma had woken up and was watching with wide, curious eyes. "But this is too much," Maya protested as David added a pack of baby formula to the growing pile. "I don't even know your name." "David Chen," he said with a smile. "And this isn't too much. This is just the beginning." As the cashier rang up over $200 in groceries, David pulled out a business card and handed it to Maya. She read it twice before the words sank in. David Chen, CEO, Pacific Northwest Food Distributors. The logo was familiar as she'd seen it on trucks delivering to restaurants around the city. "I don't understand," she said. David finished paying and helped load her bags into the cart. It is Maya, right?" She nodded, wondering how he knew her name until she remembered the cashier had used it. "Maya, What happened here tonight happens to thousands of parents every single day. Parents who work themselves to exhaustion and still can't afford basic necessities. Parents who have to choose between their own dignity and their children's needs. He gestured around the store. This ends today, not just for you, but for families like yours all across the city. Ma's confusion must have shown on her face because David continued, I'm starting a program. Tomorrow morning, I'm calling an emergency board meeting. Pacific Northwest Food Distributors is going to partner with grocery stores across the region to create a fun day, anonymous, dignified, no questions asked day for parents who find themselves in your situation. The cashier, whose name tag reads Riley, was listening intently. Like a backup payment system? Exactly, David said. When a parent's card is declined for essentials, diapers, formula, basic groceries at the store can discreetly access this fund. No paperwork, no shame, no one ever has to know. Ma felt tears finally spilling over. But why? You don't even know me. David's expression grew distant for a moment. 30 years ago, my wife died in a car accident when my son was 6 months old. I was working construction, barely making ends meet. One night, I was in a store just like this one, trying to buy formula. My card got declined, and I broke down right there at the register. The silence in the store was profound now. Even the background music seemed to have stopped. A woman behind me paid for my groceries that night, told me the same thing I'm telling you, that everyone deserves dignity. Her kindness kept my son and me afloat during the darkest period of our lives. David's voice grew stronger. That woman was a teacher, probably didn't have much money herself, but she understood that sometimes the smallest act of kindness can change everything. Riley wiped her eyes with her sleeve. What happened to your son? David smiled. He's a pediatric nurse now. Spends his days taking care of sick children, giving back to families in crisis. Funny how kindness tends to multiply, isn't it? Ma looked down at Emma, who was reaching for her mother's face with tiny, curious fingers. I don't know how to repay this. You don't repay it, David said firmly. You pass it forward. Someday, when you're in a position to help someone else, you'll remember this moment. That's how it works. As they walked toward the exit, David pushing the cart while Ma carried Emma, he continued outlining his vision. The Chen Family Foundation, I'm naming it after my wife, will launch with $1 million commitment. But more than that, I want to change how we think about poverty in this country. Outside in the parking lot, under the yellow glow of street lamps, David helped load Ma's groceries into her battered Honda Civic. The car was held together with duct tape and prayer, but it ran, and that was enough. David said as she buckled Emma into her car seat, I have a proposition for you. She looked up, wary. In her experience, propositions from wealthy men rarely ended well for women like her. David seemed to sense her hesitation. My company needs someone who understands what it's like to struggle, someone who can help design this program from the ground up, someone who knows the difference between charity and dignity. I don't have a college degree, Ma said quickly. I never finished it. You have something more valuable than a degree, David interrupted. You have perspective. You understand what our target families need because you are one of those families. The position comes with full benefits, child care assistance, and a salary that will ensure you never have to worry about buying diapers again. Ma stared at him in disbelief. You're offering me a job? Just like that? I'm offering you a chance to help other families avoid what you went through tonight. The technical details we can figure out later. What matters is that you understand the mission. 6 months later, Ma stood in front of a packed conference room at Pacific Northwest Food Distributors, presenting the quarterly results of the Chen Family Foundation's Dignity Initiative. The program had expanded to over 200 stores across 3 states, helping thousands of families access basic necessities without shame or stigma. The numbers speak for themselves, Ma told the room full of executives, reporters, and community leaders. But the real success stories are in the thank you letters we receive. Parents who didn't have to explain to their children why they couldn't buy groceries. Families who maintained their dignity during temporary hardships. In the audience, David beamed with pride. Beside him sat his son Marcus, now 30, who had taken a leave of absence from his nursing job to help expand the program nationally. The kindness that had saved their family 3 decades ago was now reaching thousands of others. Riley, the purple-haired cashier who had witnessed that first encounter, had become the program's regional coordinator, training store employees on how to implement the system with sensitivity and discretion. She discovered that her own experiences with food insecurity as a teenager made her uniquely qualified to understand the program's importance. After the presentation, Maya found David in the hallway, bouncing Emma on his knee while the toddler giggled at his funny faces. "Hard to believe this all started with a declined card," Maya said, settling into the chair beside him. "No," David corrected gently, "it started with a choice to see your struggle as an opportunity to create change, not just offer charity." Emma had fallen asleep in David's arms, her tiny hand clutching his finger. Maya watched them together and marveled at how much had changed. She now lived in a modest but comfortable apartment, drove a reliable car, and most importantly, never had to choose between her dignity and her daughter's needs. The foundation received another major donation yesterday, David mentioned casually. "That workout clothes a woman from the grocery store that night. Apparently, she's been following our story, felt convicted about her behavior and wanted to contribute." Maya smiled. "See, kindness really does multiply." As they sat in comfortable silence, watching Emma sleep, Maya reflected on the ripple effects of that October evening. The program had inspired similar initiatives in other cities. David had been invited to speak at conferences about dignified assistance programs. Riley had enrolled in social work classes, inspired to make helping others her career. But perhaps most importantly, the culture around poverty and assistance was slowly shifting. Instead of judgment and shame, there was growing understanding that financial hardship could affect anyone, that dignity shouldn't be a luxury only the wealthy could afford. "David," Maya said quietly, "do you ever wonder what would have happened if you hadn't been in line at night?" He considered the question seriously. "I think someone else would have stepped up eventually. Maybe not that night, maybe not in that store. But kindness has a way of finding its moment. The universe has a way of putting the right people in the right place when they're needed most." Emma stirred slightly in her sleep, and David carefully transferred her back to Maya's arms. As Maya looked down at her daughter's peaceful face, she made a silent promise. Emma would grow up understanding that everyone's story mattered, that dignity was a right, not a privilege, and that the smallest acts of kindness could change the world. The program David had imagined that night at the grocery store continued to grow, but its real success wasn't measured in dollars distributed or families helped. It was measured in the restoration of hope, the preservation of dignity, and the simple but revolutionary idea that in a world that often feels divided, choosing compassion over judgment could bridge any gap. That night, as Maya tucked Emma into her crib in their warm, well-stocked apartment, she whispered the words that had become their bedtime ritual. "Tomorrow, we'll find someone to help, because that's what love does, it multiplies." Outside, the city hummed with the stories of thousands of families who had been touched by a moment of kindness in a grocery store checkout line, proof that sometimes the most profound changes begin with the simplest words. This ends today.